Imagine stepping out of your front door into a blinding, freezing wind. It's -40 degrees. You have no winter coat, no central heating, and no grocery store down the street. Lurking in your backyard are 3-ton bears and cats with teeth the size of kitchen knives. You are essentially a squishy, furless biped holding a sharpened stick. Logically, you should be the quickest species to freeze into a geological popsicle. Yet, here you are, watching a video, the undisputed apex predator of planet Earth. How on earth did we pull that off? How did a species adapted to the baking savannas of Africa survive and thrive during the most brutal deep freeze in recent planetary history? Our ancestors navigated the last glacial maximum without modern weapons, GPS, or synthetic thermal gear. To understand this incredible survival story, rewind the clock 20,000 years. Northern Europe, Asia, and North America are smothered under vast sheets of ice, up to 2 miles thick. The oceans are hundreds of feet lower because so much water is locked in glaciers. The environment is a relentless, unforgiving tundra swept by howling winds. This is the Ice Age, an era where Mother Nature was actively trying to kill everything. If you were an animal back then, evolution gave you 2 options to survive. Option 1, grow massive and cover yourself in thick fur, like the woolly mammoth. Massive bodies retain heat better. Option 2, become a highly specialized, hyper-carnivorous killing machine, like the saber-toothed cat, designed to take down those walking buffets. Then, there was us, ancient humans. We didn't have thick fur or blubber. Our fingernails were useless for defense, and our top sprinting speed was a joke compared to a hungry cave lion. On paper, humans entering the Ice Age tundra is the evolutionary equivalent of bringing a water balloon to a gunfight. But we brought something else to the frozen wasteland. Something invisible, yet infinitely more powerful than razor-sharp claws. The first game changer was a terrifying force of nature that we somehow tamed: fire. You might think, obviously they used fire to stay warm. And yes, huddled around a hearth in a pitch-black cave during a blizzard was essential. But fire was far more than a prehistoric space heater. Fire was, quite literally, an external stomach. Before mastering the flame, our hominid ancestors spent massive amounts of energy digesting tough, raw food. Chewing raw roots and meat takes hours. But when you cook food, heat breaks down complex proteins and carbohydrates for you. It softens the meat and unlocks dense calories that were previously completely inaccessible. By using fire to cook, humans outsourced their digestion. Less energy was required to run our guts, and more of that precious energy was redirected to the most calorie-hungry organ in our body, the human brain. That roaring campfire did something else too. It pushed back the terrifying darkness. The sunset no longer meant cowering in a tree hoping not to get eaten. The campfire became a sanctuary, a glowing circle of safety where predators wouldn't tread. Within that circle, something profound happened. The fire extended the day. It gave our ancestors time to communicate, plan the next hunt, fashion tools, and share vital knowledge. But a campfire won't save you when you have to leave the cave and hunt in a freezing valley. You can't carry a bonfire while tracking a mammoth. To survive the open tundra, our ancestors had to take the warmth of the fire and the warmth of the animals they hunted and attach it directly to their bodies. They had to invent clothing, but they didn't just throw a bloody pelt over their shoulders. Prehistoric fashion was a matter of life and death, requiring a technological leap we completely take for granted today. If you just wear a raw animal skin like a cape, the first blast of Arctic wind is going to slice right through the gaps and instantly steal your body heat. To truly conquer the cold, you cannot just cover yourself. You have to seal yourself in. And to do that, humanity came up with one of the most underrated, world-altering inventions in our entire history. It wasn't the wheel. It was a tiny splinter of carved bone, with a hole drilled in one end. The eyed needle. It sounds incredibly basic to us now, but this little piece of shaped ivory or bone was a technological marvel. It allowed ancient humans to pierce thick hides and stitch them together tightly, using dried animal sinew as thread. The invention of the needle meant that suddenly, you aren't just wearing a loose, drafty blanket. You are wearing custom-fitted, tailored, weatherproof gear. Our ancestors figured out the science of layering tens of thousands of years before modern outdoor brands started selling expensive winter coats. They knew to wear an inner layer of soft fur facing directly against the skin to trap the body's natural heat, and a tough, leather outer layer facing outward to block the biting wind and shed the snow. They even crafted complex insulated boots, stuffing them with dried grass for extra warmth. This was absolutely critical, because out on the tundra, a single frostbitten toe wasn't just painful, it meant an infection, an inability to walk, and a guaranteed death. Imagine crafting the equivalent of a modern, extreme weather synthetic down jacket, but having to do it entirely with sharp rocks, animal hide, and bone splinters. It was a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. But the best winter coat in the world will not keep you alive if you do not have fuel burning in the furnace. And in the Ice Age, the human furnace ran strictly on fat. Today, many people try to trim the fat off their steaks, or opt for lean meats for health reasons. But in a frozen, unforgiving world, a completely lean diet is a death sentence. There is a very real, dangerous condition called protein poisoning, historically known to frontiersmen as rabbit starvation. If you eat nothing but very lean meat, like wild rabbit, your body actually uses more energy trying to digest it than it gets back in calories. You can quite literally starve to death with a completely full stomach. Ancient humans knew they needed dense, calorie-packed animal fat to survive the freezing temperatures. They needed the Ice Age equivalent of rocket fuel. And that meant going after the big boys, the megafauna. We are talking about massive steppe bison, giant deer, woolly rhinos, and the legendary mammoths. These were animals carrying massive stores of blubber and nutrient-rich bone marrow, which was essentially prehistoric butter. Our ancestors would smash open the heavy leg bones of these beasts just to scrape out every last ounce of that life-saving fatty marrow. But here is the multi-ton problem. How exactly do you bring down a mammoth when you weigh 150 pounds, and your most advanced piece of technology is a sharp rock tied to a wooden shaft? The image we often see in pop culture and cartoons is a bunch of cavemen screaming, charging directly at a giant beast, and poking it wildly. In reality, that is a fantastic way to get yourself instantly crushed, gored, or launched into the stratosphere. Ancient humans did not survive by engaging in brutal, face-to-face melee combat with prehistoric monsters. They survived by using the greatest weapon evolution ever gave them, landscape intelligence. They didn't fight the mammoth head-on. They fought the environment, and they let the environment kill the mammoth. Our ancestors were master trackers who could read a snowy landscape like an open book. They would track a massive herd for days, singling out a young, old, or injured animal. Then, instead of charging, they would spook these massive, heavy beasts, driving them into a panic toward natural, deadly traps. A sticky, freezing mud bog, a narrow, dead-end rocky ravine, or best of all, a steep cliff face. They used the geography of the earth itself as their primary weapon. Once the exhausted, terrified animal was hopelessly stuck in the mud or severely injured from a fall, the hunters could finish the job safely and methodically from a distance. It was a brilliant triumph of brains over brawn, a survival strategy built on extreme patience and calculated, minimal risk. But as clever as these tactics were, Homo sapiens were not the only hominids playing the survival game out in the frozen wastes. While our direct ancestors migrated into the freezing northern latitudes, they encountered locals who had already been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. The Neanderthals. If you were casting a movie for the ultimate Ice Age survivor, you would choose a Neanderthal over a Homo sapiens every single time. Because while we were using bone needles to fake our way through the cold, Neanderthals possessed actual, biological hardware designed for it. Picture a prehistoric powerlifter. Neanderthals were generally shorter and significantly stockier than us, with massive, barrel-shaped chests and heavily muscled limbs. Biological principles dictate that animals in cold climates evolve bulkier bodies and shorter limbs to minimize the surface area where precious body heat escapes. Neanderthals were the human embodiment of that rule. They even featured enormous, wide noses, which acted as built-in humidifiers and heaters, warming the freezing Arctic air before it could drop their core temperature. Now, compare that evolutionary masterpiece to early Homo sapiens arriving out of Africa. We were tall, lanky, and built specifically to sweat and rapidly dump body heat while running across sweltering tropical savannas. Physically speaking, our bodies were a terrible match for the Ice Age. So, without the heat-retaining frames of our cousins, how did we outlast them? The answer lies in a profoundly different kind of adaptation. Instead of waiting for evolution to change our skeletons, we changed our behavior. Lacking the biological hardware to conquer the cold, we relied on a massive software update. We leaned into the most potent survival mechanism ever devised: complex social cooperation. In the unforgiving reality of prehistoric nature, a broken limb is an immediate death sentence. If a wild horse breaks a leg, it cannot flee, quickly becoming someone else's dinner. But in ancient human camps, we see something entirely revolutionary in the fossil record. We see deeply healed bones. We find skeletons of individuals who suffered debilitating injuries or lost their teeth to old age, yet miraculously lived for years afterward. This is a glowing sign pointing to humanity's true superpower. It meant that when a hunter got trampled by a bison and couldn't walk, the group did not abandon him in the snow. They carried him. They chewed his food. They willingly shared calorie-dense meat with someone who could no longer physically contribute. This deep empathy was the ultimate evolutionary insurance policy. Caring for the vulnerable meant preserving institutional knowledge. That injured elder sitting by the fire? They were the living library of the tribe. They remembered where emergency water was hidden during a drought 2 decades ago. By keeping them alive, the tribe kept their encyclopedia of survival intact. This extreme cooperation went far beyond just the immediate family. Homo sapiens developed an unprecedented ability to maintain relationships across vast geographic distances. While Neanderthals tended to live in small, highly isolated pockets in their home valleys, our ancestors built expansive prehistoric trade networks. Archaeologists find decorative seashells from the coast, buried deep inland, and high-quality toolstone moved hundreds of miles from its source. What does a displaced seashell mean for surviving a deep freeze? It meant you had friends you hadn't seen in months. It meant that if a localized blizzard wiped out all the game in your valley, you didn't just sit in a cave and starve. You could travel 100 miles and rely on an extended network of distant allies who would take you in. We survived the ice by being the most fiercely connected society. Yet, simply cooperating wasn't enough. To truly conquer the frozen steppe, our minds had to undergo an explosion of innovation, leading to tools that would fundamentally bend the laws of physics. The human arm is a marvel of biomechanics, capable of winding up and pitching a rock with surprising speed. But if you are staring down a 2-ton prehistoric rhinoceros, your pitching arm simply isn't going to cut it. A heavy wooden spear thrown by hand might travel 30 or 40 yards, and it quickly loses the kinetic energy needed to pierce thick, matted hide and dense muscle. To survive, our ancestors needed a way to strike with lethal force from a much safer distance. They needed to bend the laws of physics, and they did exactly that by inventing the atlatl, or the spear thrower. If you have ever been to a dog park and seen someone using one of those long, plastic ball launchers to throw a tennis ball incredibly far with barely a flick of the wrist, you have seen the exact same principle in action. The atlatl was essentially a carved piece of wood, with a hook at the end that nestled into the base of a flexible spear. By gripping the atlatl instead of the spear itself, a hunter effectively added an extra artificial joint to their arm. When they whipped their arm forward, the atlatl acted as a massive lever, allowing the spear to flex and launch forward at speeds exceeding 80 miles per hour. With this prehistoric artillery, a human could accurately deliver a devastating, armor-piercing strike from over 100 yards away. You were no longer just a naked ape holding a stick. You were a mobile sniper. This weapon was a byproduct of a massive cognitive leap, an era archaeologists sometimes call the innovation explosion. Humans stopped looking at objects as single tools and started seeing them as interchangeable parts for complex machinery. They didn't just sharpen a rock anymore. They created composite tools. Picture an ancient human meticulously chipping razor-sharp microblades of flint, carving a perfectly straight groove into a piece of reindeer antler, and then gluing those blades into the groove to create a serrated knife. And what did they use for glue in a frozen wasteland? They manufactured it through chemistry. They would take birch bark and slowly bake it under a fire in an oxygen-free dirt mound until it transformed into a thick, incredibly sticky synthetic tar. They were doing complex multi-step polymer chemistry in the middle of the Ice Age tundra. But as brilliant as our weapons and prehistoric superglues were, our greatest vulnerability remained our own biology. Human senses are frankly terrible. Our night vision is abysmal, our hearing is mediocre, and our sense of smell is practically non-existent compared to the animals around us. Out in the freezing, pitch-black wilderness, a cave lion could be stalking you from 20 feet away, and you wouldn't know until its jaws were closing around your neck. To overcome this fatal biological blind spot, humanity uncovered the ultimate survival cheat code. It wasn't forged in fire, and it wasn't carved from bone. It was born with fangs, and it howled at the moon. We formed an alliance with the wolf. The domestication of the dog is arguably the most history-altering event of the Ice Age. Pop culture likes to imagine that a brave caveman kidnapped a cute wolf puppy and raised it as a pet. In reality, science suggests it was more of a mutual peace treaty, driven by the harsh realities of the cold. As humans became highly successful hunters, we left behind massive piles of cracked bones and animal scraps outside our camps. The boldest, least aggressive wolves in the area realized that scavenging from these strange, two-legged apes was much easier and safer than hunting massive prey themselves. Over generations, these friendlier wolves self-domesticated, creeping closer and closer to the glow of the campfire. And humanity quickly realized the immense value of this new companion. A wolf hanging around the edge of your camp was a living, breathing burglar alarm. With their supernatural hearing and sense of smell, they could detect a prowling predator miles away in the dead of night, barking a warning long before danger reached the sleeping tribe. Suddenly, our terrifying sensory deficit was cured. We didn't need to smell the prey. Our four-legged partners could track a wounded reindeer through a blinding blizzard when human eyes saw nothing but whiteout conditions. We had the endurance, the intelligence, and the projectile weapons. They had the blinding speed, the flesh-tearing jaws, and the radar-like senses. Together, humans and early dogs formed an unstoppable, cross-species hunting syndicate. We outsourced our senses to the wolves, and in return, we offered them a warm fire and a guaranteed meal. It was the perfect symbiotic relationship, a biological alliance that permanently tipped the scales of power on planet Earth. Armed with tailored clothing, lethal projectile geometry, complex social networks, and a fiercely loyal apex predator by our side, humans had completely hacked the freezing ecosystem. But as the millennia dragged on, the very ice that had tested us so brutally was finally beginning to lose its grip on the world. About 12,000 years ago, the glaciers finally began to retreat. The endless mammoth steppe melted away, replaced by dense forests and rising oceans. The massive megafauna that had ruled that frozen world couldn't adapt quickly enough to the rapidly shifting climate, and they vanished forever. But humanity didn't. We didn't just survive. We inherited the Earth. We conquered the Ice Age, because our greatest weapon wasn't made of flint or bone. It was the fiercely adaptable human mind. Our ability to share knowledge, to invent solutions to impossible problems, and to compassionately care for one another, allowed us to outwit a planet that was actively trying to freeze us solid. Today, we face entirely new global challenges, from shifting climates to navigating a complex technological future. But it leaves us with an inspiring reflection. If our naked, vulnerable ancestors could conquer a frozen apocalypse with nothing but campfire chemistry, stitched leather, and a loyal dog, what limits do we truly have today? If you enjoyed this journey into our ancient past, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know what prehistoric mystery we should explore next. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.